The Iron Haven Gym in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with life on a sweltering Wednesday afternoon, the air thick with the smell of sweat, the clanging of weights, and the labored breaths of people pushing their bodies to the limit. Treadmills roared steadily, sweat dripped onto the floor like the rhythm of an unspoken anthem of determination. Athletes, from clumsy beginners to muscle-bound regulars, were lost in their own worlds, eyes glued to mirrors, earbuds drowning out everything else. This wasn't just a gym, it was an arena where strength was measured by the pounds you lifted, and reputation was forged through the admiring glances of the crowd. No one paid much attention to the double doors at the entrance trembling slightly, until they swung open, hard and deliberate, and a figure stepped inside, changing everything. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walked in, devoid of the fanfare you'd expect from his larger-than-life presence on the big screen or his million-like Instagram posts. No paparazzi flashes, no entourage trailing behind, no applause greeting him like when he stepped into a WWE ring or a Hollywood set. He wore a faded gray hoodie, oversized enough to conceal the massive physique the world knew him for, paired with simple black sweatpants frayed at the hems. His worn-out sneakers moved across the polished wooden floor, barely making a sound beyond the faint squeak of rubber soles. A baseball cap pulled low hid his chiseled face, the one plastered across blockbuster posters. His eyes quietly scanned the room, not seeking attention, not demanding recognition. He was here to train, like any other ordinary person. Most people in the gym didn't notice him at first, too engrossed in their reps to spare a second glance at the tall guy who'd just walked through the door. But one person did, and that person had no intention of letting it slide unnoticed. Mike Carson, a renowned trainer at Iron Haven, stood amidst the crowd like a self-proclaimed king in his own domain. With a towering muscular frame, biceps bulging under a tight tank top, Mike wasn't just a gym rat. He was the symbol of dominance here. His booming voice often drowned out the machines, his sarcastic jabs about others' lifting form a regular performance. Mike thrived on being the center of attention, relishing the feeling of the crowd, a small group of loyal hangers-on who fed off his bravado, laughing at his every taunt. He lived to challenge people, to prove no one in this room was tougher, stronger, or more deserving than he was. When his sharp eyes caught Dwayne standing in the corner, quietly unloading his backpack and preparing to warm up, a slow, smug grin spread across his face. To Mike, Dwayne wasn't a Hollywood legend or a former wrestler who'd shaken arenas. He was just another guy stepping into his territory, an opportunity to solidify his reign. "Look at this," Mike said loudly, his voice cutting through the gym's noise, loud enough for nearby heads to turn. He leaned toward his posse, pointing at Dwayne with zero subtlety. "Who does this guy think he is? Here to lift weights, or to play the muscle-bound hero for his next movie?" A few chuckles erupted from Mike's crew, the satellites orbiting his planet, but not everyone joined in. Some glanced at Dwayne, curiosity flickering in their eyes as they began to sense something unusual. Dwayne, still stretching his shoulders, didn't react. He kept rolling his wrists, breathing evenly, as if Mike's taunt was just a breeze passing by. That indifference irked Mike. He wasn't used to being ignored, wasn't used to someone not rising to his bait. His grin stiffened, and he stepped closer, his voice rising, sharper now, ensuring Dwayne couldn't brush him off. "Hey, buddy," Mike called, now just a few steps away, hands on hips, chest puffed out to flaunt his size. "You sure you know what you're doing? This isn't a movie set. No director's gonna yell cut when you get tired. This is a place for real folks, not some fake Hollywood muscle." This time, the gym went quiet. Weights stopped clanging, treadmills slowed, conversations hushed as people felt the tension thickening the air. All eyes turned to Dwayne, waiting for his response to the blatant challenge. Dwayne paused his warm-up, slowly looking up. His gaze locked onto Mike's, not angry, not defensive, just a calm, deep stare, as if he saw right through the bravado to something Mike was trying to hide. "I'm just here to train," Dwayne said, his voice low and steady, unshaken. That simple reply hit Mike like an invisible slap. He'd expected resistance, an argument, anything he could latch on to and turn into his advantage. But Dwayne's calmness, that unshowy confidence, made Mike's stomach twist in a way he couldn't explain. The gym wasn't just watching Dwayne now. They were watching Mike, waiting to see what he'd do when his prey refused to play his game. And in that moment, the door to a real showdown swung wide open, a showdown that no one, not even Mike, could predict the outcome of. The Iron Haven gym was no longer just a workout space. It had morphed into an impromptu stage, with every eye fixed on Mike Carson and the man he'd just provoked, Dwayne Johnson. The clatter of weights faded, the hum of treadmills dulled, and even the heavy breathing of nearby lifters dissolved into the charged silence. Dwayne stood there, still in his oversized gray hoodie, hands relaxed at his sides, his calm gaze meeting Mike's, as if he didn't feel the hostility radiating toward him. But Mike, with all the arrogance baked into his every muscle fiber, couldn't stomach that indifference. He'd built his reputation at Iron Haven by turning people into rivals, cutting them down in front of the crowd, and now, with Dwayne refusing to take the bait, Mike's ego began to crack. Mike stepped closer, his expensive sneakers clicking on the hardwood floor, arms crossed over his chest to showcase the bulging muscles he'd spent years sculpting. He was nearly as tall as Dwayne, but the way he stood, chest thrust out, shoulders squared, was meant to prove he was the alpha in this space. "Just here to train, huh?" Mike echoed Dwayne's words, his tone dripping with sarcasm, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Then you won't mind proving it, right? Or are you scared those real weights might mess up your action star image?" A few snickers rose from Mike's usual crew, those guys who always clung to him like satellites. But most of the gym stayed quiet, eyes shifting between the two men, waiting to see what would happen next. Dwayne didn't respond right away. He tilted his head slightly, as if weighing Mike's words, then slowly removed his cap, revealing the chiseled face millions recognized worldwide. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that The Rock? No way, what's he doing here?" But Dwayne paid no mind. He set the cap on his backpack, rolled his shoulders deliberately, the muscles beneath his hoodie flexing then relaxing, like a machine warming up. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice deep and even, unshaken. "But if you want a test, I'm game." It wasn't a challenge, not laced with bravado, just a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet confidence Dwayne carried from his wrestling days to Hollywood sets. Mike smirked, but the grin now felt forced. He'd hoped Dwayne would snap, fight back, or at least flinch, anything he could use to spin into his favor. But Dwayne's composure, the way he didn't get sucked into Mike's mind games, made it feel like Mike had just swung at thin air. "Oh, that sounds good," Mike said, his voice pitching higher, trying to mask the irritation bubbling in his chest. He turned to the crowd, arms spread wide like an actor on stage. "Listen up, folks. This Hollywood guy says he's game, so why don't we see if he's really as tough as he looks on screen? Or if it's all just special effects and stunt doubles?" The laughter from Mike's posse rang out again, but it was weaker this time, as if they too sensed the shift in the room. Dwayne didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't change his expression. He simply walked to a corner where a rack of heavy dumbbells sat neatly lined up and began strapping on wrist wraps, each movement slow, precise, like a ritual he'd performed thousands of times. Mike, sensing an opening, jumped in. "All right, if you're so game, let's give you a little test," he said, striding to the rack and grabbing a pair of dumbbells heavier than most in the gym dared touch, 50 kilograms each. He dropped them to the floor with a loud thud, crossed his arms, and shot Dwayne a defiant look. "Start light, right? Let's see how many curls you can crank out with these." Dwayne glanced at the dumbbells, then up at Mike, his gaze still calm but now sharpened with focus, the kind honed by years facing challenges. He bent down, gripped the handles, his fingers tightening around the cold metal. The gym went completely silent, only the sound of breathing from the onlookers, and Mike's heart pounding in his chest as he waited for Dwayne to fail, or at least stumble under the weight even he rarely tackled repeatedly. But then Dwayne started lifting, not fast, not rushed, but with absolute control. His biceps flexed under the hoodie, each curl steady as a metronome, his breath escaping slowly, no grunts, no signs of strain. 1, 2, 3, then 10. He set the weights down gently, no loud clang, as if they were toys in his hands. The crowd began to murmur, some jaws dropping, others exchanging stunned glances. "Holy crap, he made that look easy," one guy whispered. "I can't even do 1 rep with those," another added. But Mike wouldn't back down. He stepped forward, forcing confidence into his voice, though it wavered slightly. "All right, not bad," he said, clapping a few times as if doling out praise. "But curls? Anyone can do those. Real strength isn't just for show. Let's see how you handle this." He turned, marched to the squat rack, and started stacking plates onto the bar. 20 kilograms, 40 kilograms, 60 kilograms, until it totaled nearly 200 kilograms when he was done. He spun back, arms crossed, his smirk now tinged with desperation. "Squat this, buddy. No stunt doubles here." Dwayne said nothing. He walked to the bar, rolled his shoulders again, then bent to check it. He adjusted his stance, feet wide, back straight, hands gripping the cold steel. The gym fell silent again, all eyes locked on him. Mike stood there, heart racing, hoping Dwayne would buckle, fail, give him a chance to reclaim his throne. But then Dwayne took a deep breath, his body tightening like a perfectly tuned machine. And he lifted the bar off the rack. He lowered, slowly, controlled, then pushed up, each rep smooth, no trembling. 1, 2, 5. By the 8th rep, he racked the bar with a soft clank, stood tall, and exhaled evenly, as if he'd just finished a warm-up. The murmurs turned to gasps of disbelief. "He did that like it was nothing," one person said. "I bet Mike can't squat that much," another whispered. Mike felt his throat go dry, the smirk vanishing from his face. He'd wanted to make Dwayne a laughingstock, but now he was the one teetering on the edge of defeat. And the worst part? Dwayne didn't even look triumphant. He just stood there, wiping his hands on his shirt, his gaze as steady as when he'd walked in. The conflict had escalated, and Mike knew he was losing ground, but he couldn't stop, couldn't let it end like this. He needed a bigger test, one last shot to turn it around, unaware he'd just lit the fuse for a battle he could never win. The air in Iron Haven Gym now hung heavy, like a storm about to break, the silence laced with gasps and whispers creating an invisible curtain around Mike Carson and Dwayne Johnson. The 200-kilogram squat bar rested quietly on its rack, a stark reminder of Dwayne's performance. 8 flawless reps, no shaking, no groans, just pure control from a man who'd made strength second nature. The crowd still reeled, eyes darting between Dwayne and Mike, waiting for the next move. Some had pulled out phones, discreetly filming, sensing they were witnessing something beyond a routine workout. But Mike, his wounded pride bleeding out in his chest, couldn't let it rest. He'd been outdone at every turn, from curls to squats, and Dwayne's silence, his unboastful calm, only made Mike feel smaller in front of the audience that once worshipped him. Mike stood there, hands on hips, his breathing sharper than usual, though he hadn't lifted a single weight in this showdown. Sweat rolled down his forehead, not from exertion, but from the pressure of the eyes fixed on him, eyes that once laughed at his taunts, now watching with doubt. He swallowed hard, forcing a strained grin, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic he couldn't hide. "All right," he said, louder than necessary, as if to reclaim his fading confidence. "Squats are fine, but that's kid stuff. Real strength isn't just lifting and dropping. It's got punch, it's got fire. Let's see what you can do with this. He strode quickly to the corner where a heavy punching bag dangled from iron chains, a favorite toy of Iron Haven's pros, weighing nearly 70 kilograms, designed to test even the toughest. Mike slapped the bag hard, making it sway slightly, then turned back to Dwayne with a challenging glare. "Hit it," he said, his tone brimming with defiance. "Not some soft movie punches. I want to see real power, the kind that makes this bag beg for mercy." The crowd buzzed, some raising eyebrows, others chuckling, not at Dwayne, but at Mike's desperate bid to salvage his pride. Dwayne didn't reply immediately. He stepped toward the bag, his eyes quietly studying it like a fighter sizing up an opponent. He removed his wrist wraps, revealing massive hands thickened with calluses, proof of years lifting, wrestling, and training relentlessly. He took his stance, feet wide, shoulders loose, and drew a deep breath, not for strength, but for focus. Then he struck. The first punch landed like a small thunderclap, the sound echoing through the gym, startling a few onlookers. The bag jolted back, chains screeching under the force. Without pause, Dwayne threw a second punch, then a third, each one fast, hard, precise, like a machine built to destroy. The crowd erupted with oohs, voices overlapping. "My God! Look at that!" as the noise grew. But Dwayne wasn't done. He shifted into a flurry of combos, left, right, then an uppercut that sent the bag lurching upward, chains rattling fiercely. Finally, he stepped back, pivoted, and unleashed a roundhouse kick, a perfect move from his WWE days, sending the bag swinging sideways, the chains groaning as if they might snap. When it settled, still swaying wildly, it was as if the bag itself hadn't caught up with what hit it. The gym went silent, then exploded. Some clapped, others shouted in awe. "What was that?" one guy yelled, clutching his head. "I've never seen anyone hit a bag like that," another whispered, eyes glued to Dwayne. He stood there, breathing evenly, no extra sweat, no sign of strain, as if he'd just done a light drill instead of leaving the room slack-jawed. Mike, a few steps away, felt the blood drain from his face. He'd hoped Dwayne would fumble, falter, give him something to mock. But instead, he'd witnessed a display not just of power, but of technique so flawless he'd never touched it despite years of bravado. But Mike wouldn't quit. He stepped forward, struggling to keep his voice steady. Okay," he said, clapping a few times as if still in control. "Punching's impressive, but strength isn't just fancy hits. It's endurance. It's grit. Let's see how long you can last." He pointed to the corner where the battle ropes lay coiled. Thick, heavy, nearly 15 meters long, a toy that even Iron Haven's strongest groaned through after minutes. "Try these," Mike said, his eyes flashing with desperation mixed with hope. "I want to see how long you can go with these ropes. Not seconds, but minutes. Real strength is staying power, not just flash." Dwayne glanced at the ropes, then back at Mike, his gaze still calm, but now carrying something deeper, not disdain, but understanding, as if he saw the fragility behind Mike's bravado. He walked over, picked up the ropes, each hand gripping an end, the heavy cords sliding across the floor as he squared his stance. The crowd hushed again, phones raised higher, everyone holding their breath. Dwayne started, slowly at first, steady waves making the ropes slap the floor with a rhythmic thump. Then he sped up, arms moving faster, harder, the ropes turning into raging waves, pounding the ground like thunder, shaking the space. 1 minute passed, then 2. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his breathing stayed even, shoulders firm, eyes focused. The crowd began counting. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. And the gym's noise became a mix of awe and reverence. Mike stood there, fists clenched, jaw tight enough to crack his teeth. He'd done the ropes before a crowd, but never lasted past 2 minutes without stopping to gasp, hands trembling. Dwayne was different. He kept going, 5 minutes, then 6, until he finally let the ropes drop, standing tall, wiping his brow with his sleeve. The gym erupted again, applause ringing out, some shouting, "Insane!" and "He's a beast!" But Mike didn't clap. His throat felt parched, his legs weak under the weight of the truth crushing down on him. He wasn't just outdone, he was outdone mercilessly by a man who didn't even need to try to prove it. Yet Mike still wouldn't stop. He stepped forward, voice shaky, but clinging to confidence. "All right. Very impressive," he said, his trembling hand pointing to the deadlift station. "But if you're really that strong, prove it. Deadlift, the ultimate test of strength. I'll load it, you lift. No games, just you and the bar." He rushed to the rack, stacking plates. 100 kilograms, 150 kilograms, 200 kilograms, until it totaled nearly 250 kilograms, a number even he'd never dared try in front of a crowd. He turned back, eyes almost pleading for Dwayne to fail. "Go for it," he said, voice hoarse. "Lift this, and I'll shut up." Dwayne looked at the bar, then at Mike, his gaze now not just calm, but tinged with something like pity. He stepped forward, stood before the bar, and in that moment, the gym knew the challenge had gone beyond a physical contest. It had become a test of pride, truth, and the real strength lying deep within each man. The deadlift bar sat heavy and still on the polished wooden floor of Iron Haven Gym, a final gauntlet Mike Carson had thrown down to salvage the last scraps of his pride. Nearly 250 kilograms, a monstrous load of stacked plates looking like a small metallic mountain. The gym's air thickened to the point of being sliceable. No more weights dropping, no treadmills humming, just the crowd's ragged breathing and Mike's pounding heartbeat as he stood there, hands on hips, eyes locked on Dwayne Johnson. The onlookers had formed a natural circle around the bar, phones raised, some whispering in a mix of awe and skepticism. "No one's lifting that," one guy said, shaking his head. "Even Mike's never tried it," another muttered, gaze shifting between the two men facing off. Mike, face flushed with pressure and sweat streaking his temples, clung to his last shred of bravado. He'd lost every challenge so far, from the bag punches that shook chains to the 6-minute rope thrashing that rattled the floor. But he held on to the hope that this bar, this ultimate test of strength, would be Dwayne's downfall. "Go for it," he repeated, voice raspy, almost pleading, though he tried to make it sound like a dare. "Lift this and I'll shut up. But if you can't, don't come back here with that star attitude." The crowd buzzed, some smirking, but most stayed silent, eyes on Dwayne, waiting to see if he was truly the invincible giant from the screen or just a braggart Mike could expose. Dwayne stood a few steps away, hands loose at his sides, his quiet gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on Mike. No arrogance, no defensiveness, just a deep look, as if he saw straight into Mike's soul, spotting the desperation, fear, and crumbling ego Mike wouldn't admit. He stepped forward slowly, his worn sneakers whispering on the floor, each step steady like a drumbeat before a fight. He stopped at the bar, bent to check it, not hesitating, but ensuring everything was in place. He widened his stance, straightened his back like steel, and gripped the cold bar. The crowd held its breath, some leaning forward, others silently praying for a moment to remember. Dwayne inhaled deeply, his chest expanding under the gray hoodie, muscles tightening like steel cables beneath the fabric. Then he pulled, not fast, not rushed, but with total control. The bar rose from the floor, plates clinking faintly as his strength flowed through it. Jaws dropped, gasps of, "Oh my God," and "no way" scattered through the room. He lifted it to his hips, held it steady for seconds. No trembling, no swaying, no strain beyond the veins bulging on his arms. Then he lowered it slowly, setting it back with a soft clank, as if it weighed no more than a backpack. The gym erupted, clapping, shouting, whistling, crashing like waves, some even jumping in excitement. "He actually did it!" one guy yelled. I've never seen anyone lift that like it's nothing, another added, voice trembling with awe. But Dwayne didn't stop there. He stood tall, wiped his hands on his shirt, and turned to Mike. His gaze now not just calm, but edged with something sharper, like a silent warning. "Anything else you want to try?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the crowd's noise. No boast, just a simple question that froze Mike in place. The room hushed again, all eyes on Mike, waiting for his move. Mike stood there, hands shaking, mouth opening, then closing, speechless. He'd bet everything on this bar, and now, with Dwayne not only lifting it but doing so effortlessly, he felt the ground beneath him collapse. He looked at the bar, at Dwayne, at the crowd. Those who'd laughed with him, crowned him king of Iron Haven, now staring with disappointment mixed with pity. Then came the real climax. Not from physical strength, but from an unexpected twist no one, not even Mike, saw coming. Dwayne stepped closer to Mike, not to taunt or gloat, but with a calm that made the whole gym take notice. He lowered his voice just loud enough for Mike and a few nearby to hear, "I didn't come here to fight you. But if you want to know what real strength is, look at yourself." He paused, eyes locked on Mike, then continued. "I used to be like you, always needing to prove something, always wanting to be the toughest guy in the room. But I learned strength isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting them up." He turned, stepped back to the bar, and gave Mike one last look. "Lift this. Not to beat me, but to see what you can do." The gym fell into a stunned silence. No one expected those words, not a jab, not a final blow to Mike's ego, but an invitation, a challenge, not for victory, but for self-reflection. Mike stood there, eyes wide, breathing hard, as if he'd been slapped invisibly. The crowd murmured, but this time not from awe at Dwayne's power, but from shock at his action. Some nodded, others whispered, "He's right." Mike stared at the bar, then at Dwayne, then at the crowd. For the first time, he didn't know what to do. He'd planned to walk away, to salvage what pride he had left, but Dwayne's words pierced through the armor of arrogance he'd worn for years. With trembling hands, Mike stepped to the bar. He bent down, gripped it, and took a deep breath, not to prove anything to Dwayne, not to reclaim his status, but because, for the first time, he wanted to try for himself. He pulled, his body strained, back bending slightly, face red with effort. The bar budged, then lifted off the floor, but only for seconds before he dropped it, gasping, hands shaking. He didn't lift 250 kilograms. No one expected him to. But the way he stood up, wiped sweat, and nodded at Dwayne was something the gym wouldn't forget. "I can't do it," he said, voice rough but free of defiance. "But I'll try again." The crowd erupted once more, not for a physical win, but for a rare moment of truth and change. Dwayne nodded slightly at Mike, saying nothing more, then turned to grab his bag. He didn't need to prove anything else. He'd done that the moment he walked in, not with weights or punches, but by standing firm in who he was. Mike, for the first time in ages, felt a fresh breath fill his chest. Not defeat, but the start of something he'd never considered: humility. The clang of the 250-kilogram deadlift bar hitting the floor echoed sharply as Mike Carson let it drop, his breathing ragged, face flushed from exertion, and trembling hands bracing his knees for support. Iron Haven Gym still buzzed from the climax, not because Mike had lifted the bar, but because of how he straightened up, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and met Dwayne Johnson's gaze with a sincere nod. "I can't do it," he said, voice hoarse but stripped of arrogance or defensiveness, "but I'll try again." The crowd, hushed after Dwayne's unexpected challenge, now burst into applause, not the excited clapping of a physical victory, but recognition of a rare moment of humility and self-awareness. Dwayne stood there, bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes gentle yet firm as he returned a small nod. No words, no fanfare, just a quiet acknowledgement that Mike had crossed a line he hadn't anticipated. Dwayne didn't linger long after that. He turned, heading for the exit, his old sneakers whispering on the hardwood, his tall frame disappearing as the double doors closed behind him. No grand goodbyes, no victory lap. He left as he'd arrived, quietly, without needing attention. But when the doors shut, the gym didn't revert to normal. Weights clanked again, treadmills hummed, but the atmosphere had shifted, lighter, warmer, as if Dwayne's presence had left an invisible mark on everyone there. The crowd dispersed, some whispering about what they'd seen, others sneaking glances at Mike with a new look, not mockery or scorn, but a mix of respect and curiosity. Mike didn't leave right away. He lingered by the bar, staring at it for a long while, his hands still trembling from the effort. His chest felt heavy, not from failure, but from a strange sensation rising within him, something he'd never allowed himself to feel in all his years as Iron Haven's king. He replayed Dwayne's words. Strength isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting them up. They echoed in his mind, hammering at the shell of pride he'd built to mask the insecurity underneath. He'd spent years proving he was the strongest, mocking others, needing the crowd's applause to feel worthy. But now, standing before a bar he couldn't lift, under Dwayne's gaze, no judgment, no triumph, he realized he'd been wrong about strength all along. The next day, Mike returned to the gym earlier than usual as dawn barely filtered through the big windows. Only a handful of people were there, the dedicated lifters who arrived before the rush, but no one noticed him. He didn't wear his usual tight tank top to flaunt his muscles, no oversized headphones or swaggering chest-out stride. Instead, he wore a plain old t-shirt, walking to the corner where the punching bag hung, the same one Dwayne had pummeled until the chains rattled. He stood before it, took a deep breath and started hitting, not as hard as Dwayne, not as fast, but with a focus he'd never had before. The first punch was weak, the second stronger, and he kept going, uncaring who watched or clapped. For the first time, he wasn't hitting to prove anything to anyone. He was hitting to understand himself. Over the next few weeks, Mike changed. He stopped being the loudmouth trainer, always taunting newcomers or bragging about his feats. He listened more, observed more. He fixed a newbie's lifting form, patient instead of sarcastic. He stood by a skinny guy struggling with dumbbells, encouraging instead of laughing. His old crew, those who'd laughed at his jabs, drifted away. But others started approaching him, asking for advice, seeking his help. They no longer saw him as a show-off, but as someone who genuinely understood the value of effort. One afternoon, finishing a squat set, not 200 kilograms, but a manageable weight he was training to improve, the gym doors opened. Dwayne Johnson walked in, still in that familiar gray hoodie, still quiet as ever. Mike paused mid-rep, set the bar down, and this time felt no pressure or hostility. He walked over, wiping his hands on his shirt, and extended one out. "Thanks," he said, voice low but firm. "For that day." Dwayne looked at him, his gaze as steady as ever, then clasped Mike's hand and squeezed. "You're doing good," he replied, no more needed, but the faint smile on his lips said it all. They didn't talk much after. Dwayne went to his corner to start his workout, Mike returned to his bar. But in that moment, they both knew a bridge had been built, not from rivalry, but from respect. As time passed, the story of that day at Iron Haven became a small legend in the gym. Not for Dwayne lifting 250 kilograms or rattling the punching bag, but for how he changed Mike without tearing him down. Those who'd been there retold it, not just about Dwayne's physical strength, but how he stood firm in his calm, turning a showdown into a lesson without a word of gloating. Mike never reclaimed his king status at Iron Haven, but he became something else, a real trainer, a man who learned that strength isn't about beating others, but surpassing yourself. And the profound lesson from this tale wasn't just for Mike. It was for everyone there, everyone who heard it. True strength isn't the loudest shout in the room, the ego fed by a crowd's praise, or the ability to lift the heaviest bar. It's the quiet persistence, the humility to see your limits, and the courage to rise after being knocked down. Not by someone else, but by what you once believed about yourself. Dwayne didn't come to Iron Haven to beat Mike. He came to remind him, and that little gym world, that the greatest strength isn't in muscles, but in the heart and will to lift others up, even those who once tried to pull you down. Mike learned that, and in his change, he proved that sometimes failure isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new man.